North Texas Territory, autumn of 1878. The wind swept across the plains like judgment, cold and merciless, carrying the first whispers of a winter that promised no mercy. Sarah Mitchell felt it cut through her thin coat as she stood at the edge of Copper Creek, her daughter's small hand clutched tightly in her own. Behind them, the town stood silent, doors closed, windows shuttered against more than just the coming storm. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah's breath formed small clouds in the air as she adjusted, the worn satchel on her shoulder containing everything they had left in the world. 8-year-old Emma stood beside her, face pale, eyes wide with confusion and fear. The child had stopped asking questions hours ago, which terrified Sarah more than any tantrum could have. Children should rage against injustice, not accept it, with silent resignation. "We need to keep moving, sweetheart," Sarah whispered, tugging gently on her daughter's hand. "We'll find somewhere before dark." The words sounded hollow even to her own ears. The plains stretched endlessly before them, broken only by scattered groves of trees and the occasional rocky outcropping. Not a cabin or homestead in sight. 3 days ago, they'd had a home, small and struggling, but theirs. 3 days ago, Thomas had still been in the ground less than a month, his mining accident leaving them with nothing but debt and whispers. 3 days ago, Mayor Blackwood hadn't yet stood on the church steps and declared Sarah Mitchell a harbinger of misfortune, her presence a blight on Copper Creek's prosperity. "The drought follows her," he'd announced to the gathered townspeople, his voice carrying on the dry wind. Thomas Mitchell was a good man until he married this woman from back east. Since she arrived, our crops have withered, the mines have grown dangerous, and now good men lie dead. Sarah had stood at the back of the crowd, Emma clutching her skirts, and watched as faces turned toward her, faces of people who'd broken bread at her table, whose children Emma had played with, whose wounds she'd tended with her herbs and poultices. One by one, they'd looked away, unwilling to challenge Blackwood's authority or the comfortable narrative that blamed their misfortunes on the strange widow rather than the harsh realities of frontier life. Only Rebecca Turner had sought Sarah out afterward, pressing a small bundle of food and a blanket into her hands under cover of darkness. "I can't help more," she'd whispered, eyes darting nervously toward her own home, where her husband waited. "They're saying you brought the ill luck that killed Thomas, that you'll bring more if you stay." "That's nonsense," Sarah had hissed back. "Thomas died because the mine owners cut corners on supports. Everyone knows it." Rebecca had only shaken her head. "They've given you until morning to leave. Silas Blackwood wants your land, he always has, and with the drought." Her voice trailed off. "Just go, Sarah, before they decide burning you out is easier." Now, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Sarah fought against the despair threatening to overwhelm her. They'd been walking since dawn, following the old trading route north. Emma's steps had grown slower, her small frame shivering despite the layers Sarah had wrapped her in. "Mama, I'm cold," Emma whispered, the first words she'd spoken in hours. Sarah knelt down, pulling her daughter close, trying to shelter her from the biting wind. "I know, sweet girl. We'll find a place soon. Maybe that grove of trees ahead." She pointed toward a dark line on the horizon. "We can make a shelter there for the night." Emma nodded, her trust absolute despite everything. Sarah felt the weight of that trust like a physical burden. She rose, adjusting her daughter's scarf more tightly around her face, and they continued forward. The sun was touching the horizon when they reached the trees, a small cluster of oaks and cottonwoods surrounding a nearly dry creek bed. Sarah worked quickly, gathering fallen branches to create a makeshift lean-to against one of the larger trunks. Emma helped silently, her small hands gathering twigs for kindling. "Will this keep the coyotes away?" Emma asked suddenly, her voice small as she glanced toward the darkening plains. Sarah hesitated. She'd heard the distant howls last night as they'd huddled in an abandoned shed. "The fire will," she assured her daughter, though she wasn't certain. She'd be able to keep one burning through the night. Their matches were few, their fuel limited. As darkness fell completely, Sarah managed to start a small fire. They ate sparingly from their dwindling supplies, hard bread and dried beef from Rebecca's bundle. Emma curled against her mother's side, beneath their single blanket, her wooden horse clutched tightly in her small hand. Thomas had carved it for her 6th birthday, his large hands surprisingly delicate as they shaped the flowing mane, the graceful legs. Emma hadn't let it go since they'd left Copper Creek. "Tell me about the horse, Mama," Emma whispered, a familiar request that had become a ritual between them. Sarah stroked her daughter's hair, gazing into the small flames. "Wild horses run free across the plains," she began softly. "They fear nothing. Not storms, not wolves, not even men. They're the fastest creatures God ever made, and the proudest. They bow their heads to no one." Emma's fingers traced the wooden mane. "Like Papa's horse, like Papa's horse," Sarah agreed, remembering Thomas's prized Mustang, sold to pay debts after his death. "Someday, when we have our own place again, you'll have a real horse of your own. Promise?" Emma's voice was already heavy with approaching sleep. "I promise," Sarah whispered, though she had no idea how she would keep such a promise. She held her daughter closer as the wind picked up, rattling through the bare branches above them. The fire was beginning to die down when Sarah heard it sound different from the wind or the distant coyotes. Movement, deliberate and careful. She stiffened, straining her eyes against the darkness beyond their small circle of fading light. A twig snapped. Sarah reached for the small knife hidden in her boot, the only protection she had. Emma stirred against her but didn't wake. "Who's there?" Sarah called, her voice stronger than she felt. "I'm armed." Silence answered her. Then, from the darkness beyond the dying fire, a coyote stepped into view. It was thin, ribs visible. Beneath its dull coat, eyes reflecting the firelight as it watched them. Behind it, 2 more emerged, equally hungry, equally desperate. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. 1 coyote might be driven off with fire and noise. 3 were another matter entirely, especially when starving. She carefully shifted Emma behind her, rising slowly to her feet. "Get back!" she shouted, waving the knife. The lead coyote hesitated but didn't retreat. Instead, it took another step forward, testing her resolve. Sarah lunged forward suddenly, shouting and kicking dirt toward the animals. The coyotes scattered momentarily, but didn't flee. They circled wider, looking for an opening. Emma woke with a frightened cry, clutching at her mother's skirts. "Stay behind me," Sarah ordered, her voice tight with fear. She grabbed a burning branch from the fire, waving it in a wide arc. The coyotes retreated a few steps, but their hunger made them bold. They would not be driven off so easily. The lead coyote tensed, muscles coiling for a spring. Sarah braced herself, knowing the thin branch in her hand would offer little protection. Emma screamed. The arrow came from nowhere, striking the ground directly in front of the lead coyote with such force that the animal leapt backward with a startled yelp. A second arrow followed, and then a third, forming a barrier between the predators and their intended prey. The coyotes scattered, disappearing into the darkness as suddenly as they had appeared. Sarah remained frozen, the branch still held out before her, her eyes searching the shadows for this new threat. Emma pressed her face into her mother's side, trembling. A figure emerged from the trees, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with silent confidence. Sarah raised her knife, though she knew it would be useless against a bow. "Stay back," she warned, her voice shaking despite her efforts to steady it. The man stepped into the fading firelight. He wore buckskin leggings and a heavy hide jacket adorned with intricate beadwork. His long black hair was braided with leather thongs, his face marked with two parallel red lines across the cheekbones. A Comanche warrior. Sarah's grip on her knife tightened, her mind racing with stories she'd heard in Copper Creek, tales of raids and violence that had become the currency of frontier fear.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The warrior regarded her silently, his dark eyes taking in her defensive stance, the child clinging to her side, their meager shelter. He made no move toward his bow, which now hung across his back. Instead, he slowly raised his empty hands, palms forward. "The coyotes will return," he said, his English accented but clear. "Your fire dies." Sarah didn't lower her knife. "What do you want?" The warrior nodded toward the horizon. "Storm comes, bad one, you die here." His statement was matter of fact, without threat or malice. Sarah glanced at the night sky. Clouds had indeed moved in, obscuring the stars, and the wind had taken on a sharper edge. She looked back at the Comanche, uncertainty warring with desperation. "I'm Takoda," he said simply. "I have shelter, food." He glanced at Emma, who was watching him with wide, frightened eyes. "Not safe here for the small one." Sarah hesitated. To trust a stranger was dangerous. To trust a Comanche warrior went against everything she'd been taught. But to stay here, with the fire dying and a storm approaching, was a death sentence, and for Emma. And that was something Sarah could not accept. "Why would you help us?" she asked, her knife lowering slightly. Takoda was silent for a moment. "My people say, the path is made by walking it." He gestured toward the darkened plains. "Your path meets mine tonight. That is enough reason." Emma tugged at her mother's skirt. "Mama, I'm scared," she whispered. Sarah looked down at her daughter's pale face, then back at the Comanche warrior. Something in his steady gaze, in the way he waited patiently for her decision without pressing, made her choice clear. She slowly lowered the knife. "We'll go with you," she said quietly. "But I'm keeping this." She indicated the knife. Takoda nodded once, seemingly untroubled by her lack of trust. "Bring only what you need. We must move quickly." Sarah gathered their few belongings, wrapping Emma in their blanket. The child clutched her wooden horse tightly as Sarah lifted her into her arms. Takoda watched silently, then turned and began walking into the darkness, clearly expecting them to follow. With one last glance at their abandoned shelter, Sarah stepped after him, carrying her daughter into the unknown. Behind them, the last embers of their fire winked out, leaving only darkness in their wake. For nearly an hour they walked in silence, Takoda moving confidently despite the growing darkness. The wind grew stronger, carrying the first cold drops of rain. Emma had fallen asleep in Sarah's arms, her small body growing heavier with each step. Sarah's muscles burned with exhaustion, but she refused to ask for rest. Finally, Takoda stopped at the base of a rocky ridge. "Here," he said, gesturing toward what appeared to be solid rock. As they drew closer, Sarah could make out a narrow opening, a crevice leading into the earth itself. Takoda ducked inside, and after a moment's hesitation, Sarah followed. The passage was narrow but navigable, even carrying Emma. After several yards, it opened into a larger space, a cave, dry and sheltered from the wind. The faint glow of coals revealed a small fire pit at its center. "Put her there," Takoda said, pointing to a bed of furs arranged against one wall. Sarah carefully laid Emma down, tucking the blanket around her. The child stirred but didn't wake, her fingers still clutching the wooden horse. Takoda moved around the space with practiced efficiency, building up the fire from banked coals and setting a small pot near the flames. The cave was surprisingly warm, the smoke finding its way out through some unseen vent in the rock ceiling. Sarah stood awkwardly, unsure of her place in this strange sanctuary. The cave contained few possessions, some weapons hanging on the wall, bundles of herbs suspended from the ceiling, several containers made of hide and wood. It didn't look like a permanent dwelling, but rather a well-used way station. "Sit," Dakota said, gesturing toward the fire. "You need strength." Sarah lowered herself cautiously to the ground across from him. Outside, the storm broke in earnest, rain lashing against the rocks, wind howling through the crevices. Emma slept on, oblivious to the tempest they had narrowly escaped. Dakota stirred whatever was heating in the pot, then filled a wooden bowl and handed it to Sarah. The stew was simple, some kind of game meat with wild onions and roots, but the aroma made her stomach clench with hunger. "Eat," he said simply. Sarah took a cautious sip, then another, the warmth spreading through her body. Dakota watched her for a moment, then turned his attention to his own meal, allowing her the dignity of eating without scrutiny. When she'd finished, Sarah set the empty bowl aside. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for the food and for saving us from the coyotes." Dakota nodded once in acknowledgement. "Why are you walking alone? With child? In coming winter?" His questions were direct, without judgment. Sarah hesitated, unaccustomed to speaking her troubles aloud. But this man had saved their lives, had fed them and sheltered them. She owed him some explanation. "My husband died," she began slowly, "in a mining accident. The town, Copper Creek, they blamed me for the misfortune, said I brought bad luck." She gave a bitter laugh. "As if I could control such things. They gave us until morning to leave." "And the child's father? His people?" Dakota asked. "Thomas had no family left," Sarah replied. "And mine." She trailed off, remembering the letters she'd sent east after his death, the single cold reply that had come. "You made your choice when you married that frontier nobody. We have no room for you or your half-wild child." "They wanted nothing to do with us," she finished simply. Dakota regarded her silently for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice low and even. "The Comanche understand this. To be driven from your home, to be blamed for the white man's fears." Sarah looked up, meeting his gaze across the fire. She saw something there she hadn't expected. Not pity, but recognition. The shared knowledge of what it meant to be cast out, to be made into something other than human. "Where were you going?" he asked. Sarah looked away. "North. There's a trading post near the Red River. I thought perhaps..." She shook her head. "I don't know. I just needed to get Emma somewhere safe." "No. Trading post is 3 days' walk," Dakota said. "Closed for winter now." Sarah's heart sank. Their one tenuous plan dissolved with a few simple words. She glanced at Emma, still sleeping peacefully among the furs, and fought back tears of exhaustion and despair. "Rest now," Dakota said, seeming to sense her distress. "Storm passes. Then we decide." Sarah wanted to ask what he meant by "we," wanted to question why this stranger continued to help them, but weariness overwhelmed her. She moved to Emma's side, settling beside her daughter on the surprisingly comfortable furs. Despite her intention to remain vigilant, to keep watch over Emma in this strange place, with this strange man, sleep claimed her almost immediately. She woke to the sound of quiet movement. Sunlight filtered through the cave entrance, indicating the storm had passed. Emma was still curled against her side, sleeping deeply. Sarah sat up carefully, her body stiff from days of walking followed by deep sleep. Takoda was crouched near the fire, examining something in his hands. As Sarah's eyes adjusted to the dim light, she realized it was Emma's wooden horse. The Comanche warrior turned it over gently, his fingers tracing the carved mane. "Good work," he said, noticing her watching him. "Strong hands made this." "My husband," Sarah said, surprised by the lack of grief in her voice as she spoke of Thomas. Perhaps she had finally cried all the tears she had for him. "He carved it for Emma's birthday." Takoda nodded, setting the horse down carefully. "The child holds it close, keeps her father's spirit near." Sarah moved closer to the fire, accepting the cup of some herbal tea that Takoda offered. "You speak of spirits," she observed. "The people in town would call that heathen talk." A faint smile touched Takoda's lips, yet they believe in evil spirits that follow a woman and bring bad fortune. He shook his head. White men's beliefs change when convenient. Sarah couldn't argue with that observation. She sipped the tea, finding it unexpectedly pleasant, earthy and slightly sweet. "How long have you been here?" she asked, glancing. "Around the cave." "This place?" Takoda shrugged. "Many years, not always. I come, I go. Safe place between worlds." "Between worlds?" Takoda gestured vaguely. "Comanche lands, white settlements. I travel between, bring messages, trade sometimes." He touched the beadwork on his jacket. "I returned from peace talks when I found you." Sarah absorbed this information. "You're a negotiator?" Takoda seemed to consider the word. "I speak many tongues. I know white man's ways. My people trust me to speak truth to both sides." His expression darkened slightly. "Not all want to hear." Before Sarah could respond, Emma stirred, sitting up with a small gasp of confusion as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. Her eyes darted frantically until they found her mother, then widened further as they landed on Takoda. "It's all right, Emma," Sarah said quickly, moving to her daughter's side. "This is Takoda. He helped us during the storm. He gave us shelter and food." Emma clutched her wooden horse tightly, regarding the Comanche warrior with undisguised fear. Is he going to hurt us?" she whispered loudly. Takoda met the child's gaze steadily. Then, without speaking, he reached for something behind him and held it out toward her, a small leather pouch decorated with colorful beads. "For keeping small treasures," he said simply. "A gift." Emma didn't move, looking to her mother for guidance. Sarah nodded encouragingly, though her own heart beat faster at this unexpected kindness. Slowly, Emma extended her hand and took the pouch, her fingers running over the intricate beadwork. "Thank you," she said softly, still wary, but no longer terrified. Takoda nodded once in acknowledgement, then turned to prepare food for the morning meal. He didn't push for further interaction, didn't demand the child's trust or affection. Sarah watched him, puzzled by this man who defied everything she'd been taught to believe about his people. After they had eaten, a simple meal of dried meat and some kind of corn cake, Takoda rose and gestured toward the cave entrance. "Storm passed, but more coming soon. Winter arrives early this year." Sarah followed him outside, leaving Emma exploring her new pouch by the fire. The morning air was crisp and clean after the storm, the sky brilliantly blue. From their elevated position on the ridge, she could see for miles across the plains. In the far distance, a thin column of smoke rose from what must be Copper Creek, so close, yet utterly inaccessible to them now. "What will you do?" Takoda asked, watching her face as she gazed toward the town that had cast her out. Sarah turned away from the view. "I don't know," she admitted. "The trading post is closed. We have no family, no friends left." The reality of their situation crashed over her anew. "We have nowhere to go. Takoda was silent for a long moment, his gaze moving from Sarah to the cave entrance where Emma could be glimpsed sitting by the fire. Finally, he spoke. "There is a place, 2 days' ride west, valley protected from winds, small cabin there."
Sarah frowned. "Whose cabin?" "Mine," Takoda said simply. "Built it many summers ago, for times between journeys." Sarah stared at him, uncomprehending.
"You're offering us your home?" Takoda shook his head. "Not offering home, offering shelter until spring comes, until you find your path." Sarah's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. "Why would you do this? You don't know us. We're nothing to you." Takoda looked out across the plains, his expression distant. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost as if speaking to himself. 3 winters passed. Fever came to my village, my wife, my son. He trailed off, then continued more firmly. No one should face winter alone, with child to protect. Sarah stood very still, absorbing his words. This man knew loss as intimately as she did, knew what it was to have everything stripped away. And unlike those who had turned their backs on her and Emma, he had chosen compassion. "I can work," she said finally. "I know herbs, medicines. I can cook, sew, help with whatever needs doing." Takoda nodded, seeming satisfied with this arrangement. "We leave when sun stands high," he said, turning back toward the cave. "Rest more, gather strength for journey." Sarah remained outside a moment longer, watching as a hawk circled lazily in the bright morning sky. For the first time since Thomas's death, since the town had turned against them, she felt something like hope stir within her chest. It was a dangerous feeling, one she wasn't yet ready to trust, but it was there nonetheless, fragile but undeniable. When she returned to the cave, she found Emma sitting beside Takoda, watching intently as he worked a piece of wood with a small knife. Her wooden horse sat beside her, and she was comparing it to whatever Takoda was creating. "Is it another horse?" Emma asked, her earlier fear seemingly forgotten in the face of this fascinating new activity. "Eagle," Takoda replied, turning the wood to show her the emerging shape of wings. "Flies highest of all creatures, seas farthest." Emma leaned closer, her curiosity overcoming her caution. "Can I touch it?" Takoda handed her the half-finished carving, his large hands gentle as they guided her smaller ones to hold it properly. "Eagle medicine is strong," he told her seriously, "brings courage, protection." Emma examined the carving with solemn attention. "Like my horse brings me papa?" she asked, glancing at her wooden toy. Takoda nodded. "The spirit remains in things made with love," he said. "Your father watches through the horse's eyes." Sarah expected Emma to be frightened by this statement, but instead, her daughter smiled, the first real smile since they'd left Copper Creek. "I think so too," Emma confided. "Sometimes I talk to him at night." Sarah felt her throat tighten as she watched this exchange. Emma had never spoken to her about talking to Thomas, had kept that small comfort private, perhaps fearing her mother wouldn't understand. Yet here she was, sharing it freely with this man they'd known for less than a day. Takoda continued working on the eagle, while Emma watched, occasionally asking questions that he answered with patient simplicity. Sarah busied herself gathering their few belongings, preparing for the journey Takoda had proposed. Her mind raced with questions, with doubts, with the ingrained suspicion that had been reinforced by years on the frontier. But when she looked at Emma, at the peaceful concentration on her daughter's face, as she watched Takoda's skilled hands transform a simple piece of wood into something beautiful, Sarah knew her decision was already made. Whatever uncertainties lay ahead, whatever challenges they might face, they would not face them alone in the wilderness with winter descending. They would go with Takoda to the valley and the cabin he spoke of. They would shelter there until spring brought new possibilities. And perhaps in that sheltered place, they might find more than just physical safety. Perhaps they might find a way to begin again, to build something from the ashes of what had been taken from them. Sarah took a deep breath, steadying herself against the hope that threatened to overwhelm her practical nature. One step at a time. One day at a time. That was how survival worked. And for now, survival was enough. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of snow not yet fallen but promised. Inside the cave, beside the warm fire, Emma laughed softly at something Dakota said, the sound as unexpected and precious as water in the desert. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, holding the moment close. They had lost so much, but perhaps against all odds, they had found something too, something neither Copper Creek nor the long winter ahead could take from them. The journey west began under clear skies, deceptively gentle for the season. Dakota led them from the Ridge Cave on horseback, a sturdy paint stallion that carried their meager belongings. Sarah walked alongside, Emma alternating between riding double with Dakota and walking hand in hand with her mother when her small legs felt restless. "How far?" Sarah asked as the sun climbed higher. The plains stretched endlessly before them, broken occasionally by clusters of cottonwoods marking hidden water sources. 2 days, Dakota replied, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. Valley lies beyond those hills. He pointed toward a distant blue smudge, barely visible against the sky. Sarah adjusted the shawl around her shoulders. The air had a bite to it despite the sunshine, a reminder that winter approached with steady determination. Emma skipped. Ahead a few paces, her spirits lifted by the journey and Dakota's promise of a cabin with walls and a real fireplace. The wooden horse peeked from her pocket, its carved mane catching the sunlight. "Your daughter grows stronger already," Dakota observed. Yesterday, fear made her small. Today, she remembers her own spirit. Sarah watched Emma, noting the straightened shoulders, the curiosity returning to her face as she studied a cluster of late-blooming prairie flowers. "Children heal quickly," she said softly. "It's their gift." "And mothers?" Dakota asked. His question simple but penetrating. Sarah met his gaze briefly before looking away. "Mothers don't have that luxury. We carry things longer." Dakota nodded as if her answer confirmed something he already knew. "The burden changes shape," he said, "but it need not crush you." They traveled until midday before stopping near a shallow stream to rest and water the horse. Emma immediately crouched by the water's edge, delighted by the tiny minnows darting. Between the stones, Sarah sank onto a sun-warmed rock, stretching her tired legs before her. Dakota disappeared briefly, returning with a handful of roots he dug from the stream bank. "Good medicine," he explained, offering some to Sarah. "Chew slowly, gives strength." Sarah accepted the roots cautiously, placing one in her mouth. The taste was earthy and slightly sweet, not unpleasant. Gradually, she felt a gentle warmth spreading through her limbs, easing the ache of constant walking. "What is it?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Prairie turnip," Dakota replied. "Old women of my tribe say it holds the strength of the earth itself." A slight smile touched his lips. "Maybe true, maybe just old women talking, but it helps." Sarah laughed despite herself, a rusty sound she barely recognized. How long had it been since she'd laughed at anything? Since Thomas's death, perhaps longer. The realization sobered her immediately. Dakota noticed the shift in her expression, but didn't comment. Instead, he moved toward Emma, crouching beside her at the stream's edge. "Look here," he said, pointing to a series of small tracks in the mud. "Fox came for water before sunrise." Emma's eyes widened. "A real fox? I've never seen one." "Smart animals," Dakota replied. "Watch humans from shadows." don't show themselves unless they choose. He traced the delicate paw prints with one finger. This one has cubs nearby. See how tracks go back and forth, bringing water to den. How do you know all that? Emma asked, clearly impressed. My father taught me, Dakota answered. His father taught him. This knowledge keeps us alive. Emma considered this seriously. Could you teach me about tracks and animals and stuff? Dakota glanced at Sarah, silently seeking permission. Sarah hesitated only briefly before nodding. Knowledge of survival was precious on the frontier, regardless of its source. I will teach what I know, Dakota told Emma solemnly, if you promise to listen well. I promise, Emma said, her face alight with excitement. Sarah watched the exchange with mixed emotions. The easy way Dakota interacted with Emma both reassured and unsettled her. What would Thomas think of their daughter learning Comanche ways? What would the people of Copper Creek say? The thought of Copper Creek brought a surge of anger that surprised her with its intensity. Those same people had cast them out to die. Their opinions no longer mattered. They resumed their journey after the brief rest, the rhythm of walking settling into Sarah's bones. The landscape gradually changed as they traveled west, the flat plains giving way to gently rolling hills, covered in tall grass that rippled like water in the strengthening wind. By late afternoon, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, and Dakota's expression grew concerned. Storm comes, he said, studying the sky. Not good to be caught in open. He led them toward a cluster of rocks thrusting up from the prairie like the spine of some ancient creature. As they drew closer, Sarah could see that the formation created a natural shelter on one side, protected from the prevailing wind. We stop here, Dakota announced, dismounting gracefully. Storm passes in night. Continue tomorrow. Sarah helped Emma down from the horse, feeling the first cold drops of rain on her face. They worked quickly to establish camp, Dakota creating a small fire in the protected alcove, while Sarah arranged their blankets on the driest ground available. The storm arrived with sudden fury just as darkness fell, sheets of rain driven by howling wind. Inside their rocky shelter, the fire burned steadily, protected from the worst of the elements. Emma huddled close to Sarah, wide-eyed at the thunderous cracks that shook the very air around them. Loud, Emma whispered, flinching as another thunderclap boomed overhead. Dakota arranged several rocks in a circle near the fire. Spirit stones, he explained, seeing Emma's curious expression. Old magic for safe journey. Do they work? Emma asked, momentarily distracted from her fear. My grandmother believed so, Dakota replied. She traveled many dangerous paths, lived to be very old. Emma reached out tentatively to touch one of the stones. Could we ask them to protect us too? Sarah opened her mouth to object, then closed it. Whatever comfort Emma could find in this moment deserved respect, not correction. Dakota nodded gravely. Place your hands like this, he demonstrated, palms hovering over the stones. Close eyes, think of safe journey, warm hearth at end of path. Emma copied his posture perfectly, her small face screwed up in concentration. Sarah watched, feeling strangely moved by her daughter's absolute trust in this ritual, in this man who had been a stranger just yesterday. The storm raged for hours, but their shelter held. Eventually, Emma fell asleep, curled against Sarah's side, her breathing deep. And even despite the continued thunder, Sarah remained awake, watching the fire and occasionally glancing at Dakota, who sat in silent vigil near the entrance to their rocky alcove. You should sleep, he said without turning, somehow sensing her gaze. Tomorrow brings more walking. I keep thinking about the town, Sarah admitted, surprising herself with the confession. About what would have happened if you hadn't found us. Dakota was quiet for a long moment. The path that was not walked doesn't matter, he said finally. Only the one beneath your feet now. Is that another Comanche saying? Sarah asked. a hint of defensiveness in her voice. Takoda turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "No," he said simply, "just truth." Sarah looked away, properly chastised. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. I'm not good at accepting help, especially when I have nothing to give in return." "You think you have nothing?" Takoda asked, genuine puzzlement in his voice. "You have knowledge of plants that heal. You have strong hands that can work. You have courage to walk away from people who wronged you." He gestured toward Emma's sleeping form. "You have daughter who trusts like deer trusts spring to return after winter." Sarah blinked rapidly against unexpected tears. "You make it sound so simple." "Not simple," Takoda replied. "Just true." He turned back to his watch position. "Sleep now. Morning comes, whether we're ready or not." Sarah settled beside Emma, pulling the blanket more securely around them both. Despite her intention to remain vigilant, the steady rhythm of the rain and the warmth of the fire gradually lulled her into sleep. She dreamed of Thomas that night, not as she had seen him last, broken and bloody from the mine collapse, but as he had been when they first met, laughing as he taught her to ride his prized Mustang. In the dream, he nodded toward something. Behind her, his expression peaceful. When she turned to look, she woke with a start. Dawn had arrived, pale light filtering through the dissipating clouds. The storm had passed, leaving behind a washed-clean world glistening with raindrops. Takoda was already up, tending to the horse and preparing a small breakfast of dried meat and the remaining corn cakes. Emma stirred beside her, sitting up with the disoriented expression of deep sleep interrupted. "Mama, is it morning already?" "Yes, sweetheart." Sarah smoothed her daughter's tangled hair. "Did you sleep well?" Emma nodded, then looked around their shelter with curious eyes. "The magic stones worked," she announced with a child's certainty. "We're still safe." Takoda glanced over at this declaration, something like amusement flickering in his dark eyes. "Magic works best for those who believe," he told Emma seriously. "Remember this." They broke camp efficiently, Sarah finding herself falling naturally into a rhythm with Takoda's movements. Where yesterday had been awkward, uncertainty, today brought a strange collaboration, born of necessity and growing familiarity. The landscape changed more dramatically as they continued westward, the rolling prairie giving way to rougher terrain. Rocky outcroppings, deeper ravines, stands of cedar and scrub oak, clutching tenaciously to thin soil. The distant blue hills, Sarah had glimpsed yesterday, grew steadily larger, their mysterious slopes beckoning with the promise of shelter. "What's the valley like?" Sarah asked as they paused to rest near midday. "The one where your cabin is." Takoda considered the question as he helped Emma mount the horse again. "Hidden," he said finally, "between two ridgelines. Stream runs through center. Good hunting. Few know it exists." "How did you find it?" Emma asked, settling comfortably. On the horse's broad back, a shadow passed across Takoda's face. "Many winters ago, I was wounded, hunted by men who wanted my scalp for bounty. Found valley by accident, or perhaps spirits led me there." He shrugged. "Built cabin later when times grew more peaceful." Sarah tried to imagine it. This proud warrior fleeing for his life, stumbling upon salvation by chance or divine intervention. The story made her uneasy, reminding her of the violent history between settlers and the Comanche, a history she had been taught from only one perspective. "These men," she began hesitantly, "the ones hunting you." "Texas Rangers," Takoda said flatly. "Not all Rangers bad men, but those ones." He trailed off, his expression hardening. "They killed many Comanche who sought peace. Women, children." His hands tightened on the horse's lead rope. "Long time ago now." Sarah fell, silent, unsure how to respond. The complexities of frontier justice and revenge, of wrongs committed on both sides, were beyond her ability to untangle or judge. All she knew was that this man had saved them when her own kind had abandoned them to die. They traveled on, the terrain growing increasingly difficult. By late afternoon, they were climbing a narrow trail that wound between rocky slopes covered in juniper and mesquite. The horse picked its way carefully, Emma now walking between Sarah and Dakota to navigate the steep path. "Almost there," Dakota said as they reached the crest of a ridge. "Valley lies just beyond." Sarah paused to catch her breath, wiping sweat from her brow despite the cooling air. Emma leaned against her side, tired but determined, her wooden horse clutched tightly in one hand. When they crested the ridge, the valley spread below them like a revelation. Protected on three sides by rising slopes, it lay cupped in the earth's palm like a precious secret. A winding stream flashed silver in the late afternoon sun, bordered by cottonwoods whose leaves had turned brilliant gold. Meadows of high grass rippled in the gentle breeze, and at the far end, nestled against the base of the northern ridge, stood a small cabin, rough-hewn but solid. "Oh," Sarah breathed, the sight more welcoming than she could have imagined. "It's beautiful." Dakota nodded, satisfaction evident in his posture. "Good place. Safe place." "Is that really where we're going to stay?" Emma asked, her voice hushed with wonder. "Yes," Sarah told her, a sudden lump in her throat. "For a while, at least." They made their way down the steep trail into the valley, the going easier now with their destination in sight. As they drew closer to the cabin, Sarah could see that it was larger than it had appeared from a distance. A main room with a stone chimney, a small attached lean-to that might serve as additional sleeping space, and what looked like a rudimentary corral for the horse. "Built it strong," Dakota said as they approached. "Good oak logs, stone foundation, winter's cold here, but cabin stays warm with fire." He dismounted at the cabin door, helping Emma down before turning to slide a wooden bar from its brackets. The door swung open with a creak of leather hinges, revealing the dim interior. "Wait here," Dakota told them. "Must check inside first." He disappeared into the darkness of the cabin. Sarah heard movement inside, then a scraping sound as shutters were pushed open. Daylight flooded the interior, and Dakota reappeared at the doorway. "All is well," he announced. "No unwelcome visitors while I was gone." Sarah followed Emma inside, blinking as her eyes adjusted to the indoor light. The cabin was simple, but surprisingly well crafted. A large fireplace dominated one wall, its stone chimney solid and well mortared. Rough-hewn furniture, a table with 2 benches, a rocking chair, several wooden chests, was arranged with practical economy. Pelts covered the packed earth floor, and bundles of dried herbs hung from the ceiling beams alongside strips of preserved meat. "You sleep there," Dakota said, pointing to a platform bed built into the corner furthest from the door, covered with more furs and a surprisingly fine woolen blanket. "I take lean-to outside." This is more than I expected," Sarah admitted, turning slowly to take in the cabin's comforts. "You've made a real home here." Dakota shrugged, but she could see he was pleased by her reaction. "Long winters, many days to make things good." He moved to the fireplace and began arranging kindling. Fire first, then food, then rest. Emma was already exploring, running her hands over the pelts, peering into corners with undisguised curiosity. "Mama, look!" she exclaimed, pointing to a shelf lined with small carved figures, birds, animals, people, all rendered with remarkable skill and attention to detail. "You made these?" Sarah asked, moving closer to examine a perfectly proportioned hawk with outstretched wings. Dakota nodded, continuing his work at the fireplace. "Winter work. Hands must stay busy when snow falls. Sarah picked up one of the carvings, a woman with a child on her back. Their faces turned toward each other in a moment of shared joy. The expression captured in the simple wooden figures was so vivid, so human, that Sarah felt like an intruder on a private moment. "This is your family," she said softly, "the ones you lost." Dakota stilled for a moment, then continued building the fire. "Yes," he said simply. "My wife, a pony. My son, Ilan." He struck sparks from a piece of flint, catching them in the tinder. "I keep them close this way." Sarah carefully replaced the carving, a wave of grief washing over her, not just for Thomas now, but for this man's family, for all that had been lost to violence and disease and the brutal vagaries of frontier life. "I'm sorry," she said, knowing the words were inadequate, but having nothing better to offer. Dakota didn't respond directly. Instead, he sat back on his heels as the fire caught, watching the flames grow with steady patience. "Fire good tonight," he said finally. "Storm brings cold behind it. Winter comes early this year." Sarah recognized the deliberate change of subject and respected it. There were depths of pain that could not be navigated by casual conversation, wounds that words could not reach. She understood this all too well. "Can I help with anything?" she asked instead, gesturing around the cabin. "It needs sweeping at least, and those shutters could use some attention." Dakota nodded, seeming grateful for her practical approach. "Tools in chest by door, broom behind, water must be brought from stream." They settled into work almost immediately, Sarah sweeping while Dakota adjusted the shutters, and Emma helped carry small bundles of firewood from the stack outside. By the time darkness fell, the cabin was in order. A savory stew bubbled over the fire, and the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the eastern sky. The meal was simple but filling: venison stew with wild onions and some kind of dried berries that reconstituted in the broth. They ate in companionable silence, the day's journey having exhausted unnecessary words. Emma yawned widely as she finished her portion, her eyelids drooping despite her obvious efforts to stay awake. "Come, sweetheart," Sarah murmured, guiding her daughter to the bed in the corner. "Time to sleep." Emma didn't protest, allowing herself to be tucked beneath the woolen blanket. She clutched her wooden horse close, her other hand still holding the beaded pouch Dakota had given her. "Will you be here when I wake up?" she asked drowsily, her question directed at both adults. "Yes," Sarah assured her, smoothing her daughter's hair back from her forehead. "We'll both be here." Dakota, still seated by the fire, nodded solemnly when Emma looked his way. The child smiled faintly, then closed her eyes, sleep claiming her almost instantly. Sarah returned to the fire, sitting across from Dakota. The flames cast shifting patterns of light and shadow across his face, highlighting the strong planes of his cheekbones, the slight silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for all of this. I don't know what we would have done." Dakota raised a hand, stopping her words. "No need for that," he said. "What is done is done." Sarah nodded, respecting his discomfort with gratitude. They sat in silence for a time, listening to the fire pop and hiss, to Emma's soft, even breathing from the corner. "Tomorrow I hunt," Dakota said eventually. "Need meat before snow comes. You will be safe here until I return." "How long will you be gone?" Sarah asked, surprised by the flicker of alarm she felt at the prospect of his absence. "1 day, maybe 2, Dakota replied. "Depends on hunting." He studied her face. "You afraid to be alone?" "No," Sarah said quickly, then reconsidered. "Perhaps a little. Not for myself, but for Emma." Dakota nodded, as if this made perfect sense. "Valley is safe. Few know it exists. No predators larger than coyote, and they fear human scent." Gestured toward a rifle mounted on pegs above the door. "Weapon there if needed. You know how to use." "Yes," Sarah said. "Thomas taught me before." She trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. "Yes, I can use it if necessary." Takoda seemed satisfied with this. He rose and moved to one of the wooden chests, retrieving something wrapped in soft doeskin. Returning to the fire, he unwrapped the bundle, revealing a knife with a bone handle and a blade that gleamed in the firelight. "Take this," he said, offering it to Sarah. "Good steel, sharp edge, useful for many things." Sarah hesitated before accepting it, testing the weight in her hand. The knife was beautifully balanced, clearly a prized possession. "I can't take this," she protested. "It's too valuable." "Not giving," Takoda clarified. "Lending until you have your own again." His expression was serious. Woman without knife is like eagle without talons, vulnerable. Sarah nodded slowly, understanding the practicality behind the gesture. "Thank you," she said again, but this time Takoda merely inclined his head, accepting her gratitude without discomfort, since it related to a practical matter rather than an emotional one. Later, as Sarah lay beside Emma in the surprisingly comfortable bed, listening to the night sounds of the valley filtering through the cabin walls, she realized something disturbing. For the first time since Thomas's death, she felt safe. Not completely. There was too much uncertainty ahead for that, but safer than she had in months. The irony that this security came from a Comanche warrior, a man she had been taught to fear since childhood, was not lost on her. She thought of Copper Creek, of the faces that had turned away when she needed them most, of Mayor Blackwood's convenient accusations, his eyes on her small plot of land, even as he claimed divine insight into her supposed curse. The memory brought a surge of anger so strong it briefly took her breath away. When had she become so angry, Sarah wondered, staring into the darkness? When had the grief for Thomas transmuted into this smoldering rage that seemed to have no outlet, no resolution? She'd been so focused on survival, on keeping Emma safe and fed, that she hadn't recognized the furious creature growing inside her own chest. Beside her, Emma murmured in her sleep, her small body curling closer to her mother's warmth. Sarah stroked her daughter's hair gently, feeling the anger recede beneath a wave of fierce protectiveness. Emma deserved better than a mother consumed by bitterness, deserved a chance at happiness, at a life not shadowed by loss and rejection. Outside, an owl called softly, its voice carrying clearly in the still night air. From the lean-to, Sarah heard Takoda moving, the soft creak of leather as he presumably checked his hunting gear for the morning. These ordinary sounds, child breathing, owl hunting, man preparing for tomorrow's work, formed a tapestry of normal, life that felt alien after months of grief and crisis. Perhaps, Sarah thought as sleep finally began to claim her, this unexpected sanctuary might offer more than mere survival. Perhaps here, in this hidden valley with this strange, solitary man, they might find a way to live again, not just exist. It was a dangerous hope, fragile as a newly kindled flame in winter wind. But as she drifted into sleep, Sarah found herself unwilling to extinguish it. Morning arrived with pearl-gray light, filtering through the cabin's shutters, and the scent of coffee filling the small space. Sarah opened her eyes to find Emma already up, sitting cross-legged on a fur near the fire, watching intently as Takoda demonstrated how to repair the frayed strap of a leather pouch. "Like this," he was saying softly, his large hands moving with surprising delicacy as he threaded a bone needle through the tough material. "Always pull tight, but not too tight. Leather needs to breathe." Emma nodded solemnly, her complete focus on the lesson touching something deep in Sarah's heart. How long had it been since her daughter had shown such interest in anything? Since the weight of their precarious situation hadn't pressed down on her small shoulders. Sarah sat up, drawing their attention. "Good morning," she said, pushing her hair back from her face. "You're up early, Emma." Takoda's teaching me important stuff, Emma replied earnestly, about leather and tools and tracking animals. Did you know you can tell how old animal tracks, or by how sharp the edges are? I didn't know that, Sarah admitted, sliding from the warmth of the bed and moving toward the fire. The autumn morning carried a distinct chill, a reminder of the approaching winter. Takoda poured coffee into a battered tin cup and handed it to her without ceremony. Child learns quickly, he observed. Good eyes, notices details. Sarah accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm container. Thank you, she said, meaning both the coffee and the attention he'd shown Emma. What time will you leave for hunting? Soon, Takoda replied, rising to his feet in a fluid motion. Light good now, animals moving. He gestured toward a shelf where several jars and containers stood neatly arranged. Food there, dried meat, cornmeal, beans, honey. Stream has good water, wood stacked behind cabin. Sarah nodded, understanding the practical information he was providing for their time alone. We'll be fine, she assured him, though a flicker of anxiety still troubled her at the thought of his absence. How far will you go? Ridge to north, Takoda said, moving toward the door where his bow and quiver already waited. Good hunting there. Deer come down from higher ground before snow. He paused, looking at Emma. Remember what I showed you yesterday about different animal signs? Emma nodded eagerly. Fox tracks look like dog but smaller. Deer have split hooves. Rabbit tracks look like a Y. Takoda smiled, a rare expression that transformed his serious face. Good memory. Practice while I'm gone. Show your mother. Emma beamed at the praise, sitting up straighter. I will, and I'll take care of the cabin too. Takoda turned to Sarah, his expression sobering. Bar door at night, he instructed. Keep rifle close. Probably no trouble, but wise to be careful. We'll be fine, Sarah repeated with more confidence than she felt. The thought of being truly alone in this unfamiliar place, responsible for their safety without backup, was daunting. Takoda seemed to sense her unease. Medicine bag on shelf, he said. Red pouch. If troubles come. He hesitated. If spirits grow restless or shadows move wrong ways, burn small pinch of what's inside. Smoke keeps bad things away. Sarah blinked, uncertain how to respond to this unexpected blend of practical advice and spiritual guidance. All right, she said finally, though I hope we won't need it. Takoda nodded once. Hope is good, preparation better. He picked up his bow and a small pack of provisions. 2 sons I return, maybe sooner if hunting good. Emma jumped, up suddenly, running to hug Takoda's legs. Be careful, she said, her voice muffled against the leather of his leggings. Come back safe. Takoda stood perfectly still for a moment, surprise evident in his posture. Then, slowly, he placed one hand on Emma's head, the gesture awkward but gentle. I will return, he promised. You keep your mother safe until then. Emma nodded solemnly, stepping back. Takoda met Sarah's gaze over the child's head, something unreadable passing between them. Then, with a final nod, he was gone, the door closing firmly behind him. Sarah moved to slide the bar into place, then thought better of it. The morning was young, the valley peaceful, and there was no reason to lock themselves away from the beauty that surrounded them. Come, she said to Emma, setting down her coffee. Let's explore our new home properly. I want to see this stream, and we should gather more firewood before dark. Emma's face lit up. Can I show you the tracks Takoda taught me about? And the special berries that grow by the water? All of it, Sarah agreed, finding her shawl and wrapping it around her shoulders. Show me everything. The first day alone in the valley passed with surprising ease. Sarah and Emma explored their surroundings, following the winding stream that bisected the valley floor and discovering small treasures along its banks. Late wildflowers still defiantly blooming, smooth stones perfect for skipping across quiet pools, even a fallen log that served as a natural bridge at the stream's narrowest point. "Look, Mama!" Emma called, balancing carefully on the log bridge. "I'm crossing all by myself." Sarah watched, heart in her throat, as her daughter navigated the makeshift crossing. Just a week ago, Emma had been too scared to venture more than a few steps from her side. Now, here she was, arms outstretched for balance, face alight with accomplishment as she made her way across the water. "Well done, sweetheart," Sarah called, genuine pride warming her voice. "Just be careful." They gathered firewood in the afternoon, stacking it neatly behind the cabin as Dakota had done. Sarah found herself noticing details she might once have overlooked: how the wood was arranged with the driest pieces on top, how the kindling was separated and stored under a small shelter of its own, protected from dampness. Everything in this place spoke of careful preparation, of lessons hard learned. As twilight descended, they returned to the cabin. Sarah barred the door as Dakota had instructed, though the valley felt far removed from danger. She busied herself, preparing a simple meal from the stores Dakota had left: cornmeal mush sweetened with a spoonful of wild honey, dried venison softened in hot water until it became almost tender. "Do you think he's all right out there?" Emma asked as they ate by firelight, her small face serious. "All alone in the dark?" Sarah considered her answer carefully, aware of how much weight her daughter placed on her words. "Dakota knows these lands better than we ever could," she said finally. "He's probably made a safe camp and is watching the stars right now." Emma seemed satisfied with this. "Tomorrow, he'll bring back a deer," she declared with absolute certainty. "And then we'll have fresh meat for days and days." "Perhaps," Sarah agreed, marveling at her daughter's quick attachment to their unlikely benefactor. "But we must be prepared for whatever comes." Later, as she tucked Emma into bed, Sarah noticed her daughter had arranged her treasures carefully beside the wooden horse. The beaded pouch Dakota had given her, several unusual stones collected from the stream bed, and a single eagle feather found beneath a tall pine. "Where did you get this?" Sarah asked, touching the feather gently. "Dakota showed me where to look," Emma said sleepily. "He said eagle feathers are sacred, that they carry messages to the spirit world." She yawned widely. "I'm keeping it safe for him." Sarah stroked her daughter's hair, saying nothing. The easy way Emma absorbed Dakota's teachings, his beliefs so different from what Sarah had been raised to regard as truth, both concerned and fascinated her. Children adapted so quickly, their minds unburdened by the prejudices adults carried, like stones in their pockets. After Emma fell asleep, Sarah sat alone by the fire, listening to the night sounds filtering through the cabin walls, the distant call of coyotes, the whisper of wind through pine needles, the occasional rustling of some small creature in the undergrowth. She held Dakota's knife in her hands, running her thumb along the polished bone handle, feeling the perfect balance of the blade. What strange turns life took, Sarah thought, gazing into the flames. A month ago, she'd been a respectable widow in Copper Creek, struggling but surviving. Now she was alone in a remote valley, sheltered in a Comanche warrior's cabin, holding his knife, wearing his protection like an invisible cloak. If anyone from town could see her now, they would cross themselves and whisper of possession, of savagery, of a woman who had fallen from grace. The thought brought a sudden, unexpected smile to Sarah's lips. Let them whisper, let them cross themselves and huddle behind their righteous walls. They had cast her out to die, and instead she had found something she hadn't realized she'd been missing, a sense of possibility. Sarah tucked the knife carefully beneath her pillow that night, but she didn't need it. The valley remained peaceful, the cabin secure. She slept more deeply than she had in months, waking only when dawn light filtered through the shutters and Emma's excited voice broke through her dreams. "Mama, come quick, there's smoke on the ridge." Sarah rose hastily, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders as she joined Emma at the cabin door. Sure enough, a thin column of smoke rose from the northern ridgeline, barely visible against the morning sky. "It's Dakota," Emma announced confidently. "He's signaling us." Sarah squinted at the distant smoke. "How do you know it's a signal? It could be a campfire." Emma shook her head with the certainty of the newly educated. "Dakota showed me. One thin smoke column means I am here, or I am coming home. 3 columns would mean danger." Sarah studied her daughter with surprise. "When did he teach you that?" "Yesterday morning, before he left," Emma replied. "He said it was important to know signals, that sometimes voices can't reach across distances, but smoke can." Sarah turned back to the ridge, watching the solitary smoke column rise straight and true in the still morning air. "So he's letting us know he's on his way back." Emma nodded emphatically. "And that means he was successful. He got a deer, I just know it." Sarah smiled at her daughter's enthusiasm. "Well, let's prepare for his return then. We should bring in more water and make sure the fire is built up." They worked together throughout the morning, falling into an easy rhythm. Sarah was surprised by how naturally domestic tasks came to her in this place, how satisfying it felt to sweep the packed earth floor, to arrange dried herbs in bundles, to feed the fire until it burned hot and steady. There was peace in these simple activities, a quieting of the mind that she hadn't experienced since before Thomas's death. By midday, they heard the approaching hoofbeats of Dakota's horse. Emma rushed outside, barely able to contain her excitement. Sarah followed more, sedately, though she couldn't deny the relief she felt at Dakota's return. He appeared from the tree line, leading his paint stallion, which now carried a substantial burden across its back, the carcass of a young buck, already field-dressed and ready for butchering. Dakota himself looked unchanged, his expression composed, though Sarah thought she detected a hint of satisfaction in his bearing. "You came back," Emma called, running to meet him. Dakota inclined his head gravely. "I said I would," he replied, as if the possibility of any other outcome had never existed. "You got a deer," Emma continued, circling the horse to examine Dakota's prize. "I told Mama you would." "Hunting was good," Dakota agreed. "Spirits favored the valley today." He turned to Sarah, his dark eyes assessing. "All is well here?" Sarah nodded. "All is well. We explored the valley, gathered wood, kept the fire burning." She smiled slightly. "And we saw your smoke signal this morning." Something like approval flickered across Dakota's features. "The child remembered," he said, glancing at Emma. "Good." "I remembered everything," Emma assured him earnestly, "about the tracks and the signals, and how to tell which direction is north, even when you can't see the sun." Dakota handed her the horse's lead rope. "Take him to water," he instructed. "He has worked hard today." Emma accepted the responsibility with solemn pride, carefully leading the horse toward the stream. Sarah watched her go, marveling at the transformation in her daughter. Just days ago, Emma had been afraid of her own shadow. Now she led a stallion to water with confident ease. "She learns quickly," Dakota observed, echoing Sarah's thoughts. "Too quickly, perhaps," Sarah murmured. Dakota gave her a questioning look. "I worry about how easily she accepts all this," Sarah explained, gesturing around the valley. "How quickly she's forgotten." She stopped herself, unsure how to express her concerns without sounding ungrateful. "Forgotten the people who turned you away?" Dakota finished for her, his perception uncomfortably accurate. "The town that wished you dead rather than offer shelter." Sarah flushed. "They weren't all like that," she said defensively, though even as she spoke, she struggled to name those who had stood against the tide of suspicion and fear. "Only Rebecca and even she had helped under cover of darkness, afraid to be seen offering comfort to the cursed widow. Takoda studied her silently for a moment. "The child has not forgotten," he said finally. "She has survived. Different thing." He moved past Sarah toward the cabin, leaving her to consider his words. The deer carcass would need immediate attention. She knew there was work to be done, practical tasks that required focus and effort. Questions of memory and forgetting, of adaptation and survival, would have to wait. The remainder of the day passed in efficient industry. Takoda butchered the deer with practiced skill, hanging portions to dry in the smoke of a small outdoor fire, setting others aside for immediate cooking. Sarah found herself working alongside him with surprising ease, her hands remembering skills learned from her mother long ago, before she'd come west as Thomas's bride. "You've done this before," Takoda observed, as Sarah expertly separated meat from bone. "My father was a hunter," Sarah replied, not looking up from her work. "Before we moved to town, we lived off what he could bring home. My mother taught me how to make use of every part." Takoda nodded approvingly. "Waste is disrespect to the animal spirit," he said. "Your mother taught well." The simple praise warmed Sarah unexpectedly. How long had it been since anyone had acknowledged her capabilities, her worth beyond being Thomas's widow or Emma's mother? In Copper Creek, her knowledge of herbs and healing had been tolerated at best, viewed with suspicion at worst. Here, in this valley with this man, her skills were valued, respected. Emma flitted between them, eager to help, but still too young for the more delicate tasks of butchering. Takoda gave her smaller jobs, fetching water, gathering specific herbs, he pointed out, sorting the sinew that would be used for sewing and bowstrings. She performed each task with earnest concentration, beaming whenever Takoda offered a word of approval. By evening, the immediate work was completed. Fresh venison sizzled over the fire, its rich aroma filling the cabin. Sarah had prepared a stew with some of the tougher cuts, adding wild onions and the last of the dried corn from Takoda's stores. Emma sat cross-legged near the hearth, watching in fascination as Takoda worked a deer hide, scraping it clean with a bone tool. "Will you make something from it?" she asked. "Many things," Takoda replied. "Moccasins, perhaps, or winter leggings." He glanced at Emma's worn shoes. "Your feet grow cold easily. Deerskin stays warm." Emma's eyes widened. "You'd make moccasins? For me?" Takoda nodded as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Winter comes, feet must stay warm." He looked up at Sarah. "For you also. Town boots not made for deep snow." Sarah glanced down at her practical but deteriorating footwear, purchased in St. Louis 2 years ago. "That's very kind," she said, softly, "but unnecessary. We won't impose on your hospitality beyond winter." A brief silence followed her words. Emma's face fell, and even Takoda's steady hands paused in their work. "Where will you go?" Emma asked, her voice small. Sarah hesitated, caught off guard by the question. In truth, she had given little thought to what came after winter. Survival had consumed her focus for so long that planning beyond the immediate future seemed almost an impossible luxury. "North, perhaps," she said finally, "to the trading post when it reopens in spring, or east to Fort Worth, where there might be work." "That's so far?" Emma whispered, clutching her wooden horse tightly. "And we don't know anybody there." "We didn't know Takoda a week ago," Sarah pointed out gently. "Yet here we are." Takoda had resumed his work on the hide, his expression unreadable. "Spring is distant," he said after a moment. "Many moons between now and then. No need to decide tonight what cannot be done until snow melts." His practical wisdom eased the sudden tension. Emma relaxed visibly, and Sarah found herself grateful for his intervention. He was right, of course. The immediate challenges of winter survival deserved their full attention. Questions of spring and beyond could wait. The venison was as delicious as it smelled, tender and flavorful after months of dried provisions and scanty meals. Sarah watched with quiet joy as Emma ate with enthusiasm, color returning to her cheeks with each passing day. The child was flourishing. Here, away from the whispers and sidelong glances of Copper Creek, free from the constant strain of existing where they weren't wanted. After the meal, as they sat contentedly by the fire, Takoda retrieved something from his pack, a small bundle wrapped in softened hide. He handed it to Emma without ceremony. "Found this," he said simply. "Thought you might like it." Emma unwrapped the bundle carefully, revealing a perfect pine cone, larger than any Sarah had seen before, its scales arranged in an intricate spiral pattern. "It's beautiful," Emma breathed, turning it in her hands to examine it from all angles. "From high mountains," Takoda explained. "Special pine grows there. Cones hold seeds big enough to eat." He pointed to the spaces between the scales. Seeds gone now, taken by squirrels and birds, but cone remains. Emma cradled the gift as if it were made of gold. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'll keep it forever." Takoda nodded, seemingly satisfied with her response. His gaze shifted to Sarah, who had been watching the exchange with mingled emotions, gratitude for his kindness toward Emma, discomfort at how easily her daughter accepted these pagan tokens, and beneath it all, a growing warmth she wasn't yet ready to acknowledge. "For you also," Takoda said, reaching into his shirt and withdrawing another small object. Sarah accepted it uncertainly. It was a stone, smooth and oval, small enough to fit comfortably in her palm. In the firelight, she could see that it was remarkably colorful, deep red with veins of cream and gold running through it like tiny rivers. "Healing stone," Takoda said, watching her examine it. "My people say it draws pain from the body, from the spirit." He hesitated slightly. "You carry much pain. Perhaps stone helps." Sarah stared at the stone, unexpectedly moved by the simple gift and the perception behind it. Thank you," she managed, closing her fingers around the cool surface. "It's beautiful." Takoda inclined his head in acknowledgement, then without further ceremony, he rose and moved to the door. "I check valley before night falls," he said. "Make sure all is secure." After he had gone, Emma moved to sit beside Sarah, leaning against her side in a familiar gesture of affection. "I like it here, Mama," she said softly. "Can't we stay, even after winter?" Sarah stroked her daughter's hair, unable to answer. The stone felt warm in her palm now, as if it had absorbed her body heat. She wondered what Thomas would say if he could see them now, sheltered by a man from a people he had only spoken of with suspicion and fear. What would he think of his daughter learning Comanche ways, of his wife sitting by a Comanche fire, holding a Comanche healing stone? "We'll see what spring brings," Sarah said finally, the only honest answer she could give. "For now, let's be grateful for this place, for Takoda's kindness." Emma seemed to accept this, nestling closer. "Takoda says gratitude is a form of prayer," she murmured sleepily. "That the most important prayers aren't words at all, but feelings in the heart." Sarah looked down at her daughter in surprise. "When did he tell you that?" "This morning," Emma replied. "When we saw his smoke signal, I asked if he prayed for a successful hunt, and he said he didn't need to, because gratitude for what already exists is stronger than asking for what doesn't." Sarah pondered this unexpected philosophy as Emma's eyes grew heavy with sleep. There was wisdom in it, she had to admit, a different kind of faith than the stern religion preached from Copper Creek's church pulpit, but faith nonetheless. a recognition of something greater than human concerns, of a world ordered by powers beyond their understanding. The days that followed fell into a surprisingly comfortable rhythm. Dakota continued Emma's education in frontier survival, teaching her to identify edible plants, to read weather signs in cloud patterns, to move quietly through the woods without disturbing wildlife. Sarah found herself joining these lessons. More often than not, her initial skepticism giving way to genuine interest as she recognized the practical value of what Dakota shared. "Prairie turnip grows here," Dakota explained one morning, kneeling to indicate a particular plant with feathery leaves. "Dig deep for root. Good food, good medicine." "Like the one you gave me on our journey here?" Sarah asked, crouching beside him to examine the plant more closely. Dakota nodded approvingly. "You remember? Good." He glanced at Emma, who was carefully copying the plant's appearance into the dirt with a stick. "Memory for plants is important. Mistake can bring sickness, death." "My grandmother knew herbs," Sarah said, almost to herself. "She had a book filled with drawings, descriptions. I used to watch her prepare remedies for neighbors, for family." "Your knowledge comes from book?" Dakota asked, no judgment in his tone, merely curiosity. Sarah shook her head. "From watching, mostly, from doing. The book was—" She paused, a sudden sadness washing over her. "The book was left behind when I married Thomas. My father didn't approve of the match. Said I was throwing myself away. On a fortune hunter with wild ideas." "Was he right?" Dakota asked, his directness startling Sarah into honesty. "Perhaps," she admitted. "Thomas had dreams bigger than his abilities. The farm, then the store, then the mining investment. None of them prospered as he believed they would." She sighed, the old familiar grief tinged now with unexpected clarity. "He meant well. He wanted to give us everything, but wanting is not the same as doing." Dakota finished for her, rising to his feet with fluid grace. "Many men are destroyed by dreams too big for their hands to hold." The simple truth of this observation struck Sarah deeply. Yes, that had been Thomas's fatal flaw. Dreams that outpaced his capacity to fulfill them, ambitions that consumed practicality and caution. She had loved him for his dreams, for the boundless optimism that had swept her away from her restrictive Eastern life. But that same quality had ultimately left her and Emma vulnerable, adrift in a hostile world. "What are you talking about?" Emma asked, looking between them curiously. "Plants," Dakota said smoothly, pointing to another specimen nearby. "And this one. Dangerous. Never touch red berries like these." The lesson continued, the moment of revelation passing unremarked. But that night, as Sarah lay awake, listening to the cabin settle around her, Dakota's words echoed in her mind. For the first time, she allowed herself to acknowledge the anger that had been building since Thomas's death, not just at the town that had rejected her, but at Thomas himself for leaving them so vulnerable, so unprepared. It felt like betrayal to criticize him, even in the privacy of her thoughts. Thomas had been a good man, kind and loving. His failures had never been born of malice or laziness, only of that boundless optimism that refused to acknowledge limits. He had truly believed that the next venture would be the one to secure their future, that prosperity waited just around the corner. And now here she was, sheltered by a man who embodied the opposite of Thomas's nature. Cautious, practical, his dreams scaled to what his hands could accomplish. The cabin itself was testament to this philosophy, modest but sound, built to endure rather than impress. Everything Dakota did carried this same quality of mindful pragmatism, from the way he stacked firewood to how he preserved meat. From the careful repair of tools to his measured instruction of Emma, Sarah turned the healing stone over in her palm, feeling its smooth surface, the slight variations in texture where the colored veins ran through the red matrix. Perhaps there was healing in acknowledging truth, in allowing herself to see Thomas clearly, with love but without illusion. Perhaps that was the first step toward whatever awaited them beyond winter. The following morning, a subtle shift in the air signaled changing weather. Takoda sniffed the wind as they stood outside the cabin, his expression growing serious. "Snow. It comes," he announced. "2 days, maybe less. We must prepare." What followed was an intensive period of preparation that drew on all their combined energy. Additional firewood was gathered and stacked, game was hunted and preserved. The cabin's view gaps were stuffed with moss and clay to block drafts. Water was carried in and stored in covered containers. Takoda even constructed a simple awning over the cabin door to prevent snow from blocking their exit. Sarah worked alongside him with steady determination, aware that their survival through the coming winter would depend on these preparations. Emma helped where she could, her small hands busy with tasks suited to her size and strength. There was no time for lessons now, for stories or philosophical discussions. The approaching storm demanded their complete attention. The first snowflakes began to fall just as the final preparations were completed. They started gently, drifting down like tiny feathers, deceptively peaceful. Emma ran outside, face turned upward, tongue extended to catch the delicate crystals. "Snow, Mama," she called joyfully. "Real snow." Sarah watched from the cabin doorway, sharing her daughter's delight while understanding, as Emma could not, what the snow truly heralded. Months of potential hardship, of confinement, of testing their endurance and resourcefulness. Takoda moved to stand beside her, his gaze also on Emma's dancing figure. "Child sees beauty," he observed. "Adult sees challenge. Both are true." Sarah glanced at him, struck once again by his perception. "You're not concerned about the winter?" "Concerned? Yes," Takoda replied. "Afraid, no." He gestured toward their stacked firewood, their preserved food, the sturdy walls of the cabin. "We have prepared what can be prepared. The rest is in the hands of greater powers." This calm acceptance both impressed and unsettled Sarah. She had been raised to believe that sufficient effort, sufficient planning could overcome any obstacle. The notion of surrendering to forces beyond her control went against her nature. Yet there was undeniable wisdom in Takoda's approach, a recognition of limits that paradoxically brought a kind of freedom. "Emma," Sarah called as the snowfall began to intensify. "Come inside now, you'll catch your death." The child came running obediently, cheeks flushed with cold and excitement. "It's getting thicker," she announced as she crossed the threshold. "Soon everything will be white." Takoda nodded gravely. "First snow always comes gentle, like a scout testing the land. Then the warriors follow, fiercer, stronger." He glanced at the darkening sky. "Tonight, they come." His prediction proved accurate. By evening, the gentle snowfall had transformed into driving sheets of white, the wind howling around the cabin's walls like a living thing seeking entry. Emma's initial excitement gave way to wide-eyed concern as the storm's fury increased. "It sounds angry," she whispered, pressing closer to Sarah as they sat by the fire. "Not angry," Takoda corrected from across the hearth. "Just powerful. Storm has no feelings about us, good or bad. It simply is." Emma considered this explanation. Like how the coyotes weren't really mean when they were hunting us. They were just hungry? Takoda nodded. "You understand. Nature is not kind or cruel. Only humans have such thoughts." Sarah found herself considering this perspective so different from what she had been taught. The ministers of her childhood had spoken of weather as God's instrument, of storms as divine punishment or blessing. Takoda's view was simpler, less personal. Nature as a force unto itself, indifferent to human concerns, yet demanding human respect. The storm continued through the night and into the following day. Snow piled against the cabin walls, drifting higher as the wind sculpted it into fantastic shapes. Inside, they maintained their small circle of warmth and safety, the fire burning steadily, their stored provisions ensuring they need not venture out until the weather cleared. Emma grew restless by the second day of confinement, unused to such limited space after their days of exploring the valley. Takoda, noticing her fidgeting, retrieved a bundle of supplies from one of his storage chests. "Come," he said, gesturing her closer. "I show you how to make things from sinew and hide, useful skill for winter days." Emma eagerly joined him, watching intently as his deft fingers demonstrated how to prepare sinew for use as thread, how to punch holes in leather. For sewing, how to create simple but sturdy designs. Sarah observed from her seat by the fire, where she was mending one of Emma's dresses, impressed by Takoda's patience as he guided her daughter's clumsy first attempts. "Like this?" Emma asked, holding up a small piece of deerskin where she had managed to create a rudimentary stitch. "Good first try," Takoda approved. "Now again, smoother this time." As Emma concentrated on her task, Takoda glanced at Sarah. "You sew well," he observed, nodding toward her neat stitches. "My mother insisted," Sarah replied with a small smile. "Said no man would marry a woman who couldn't keep his clothes from falling off his back." "Wise woman," Takoda commented, the faintest hint of humor in his voice, though strange to think marriage depends on such things. Sarah found herself chuckling. There were many strange rules about marriage where I came from. About proper behavior, proper matches. She shook her head slightly. "Thomas broke all of them by courting me. My father nearly disowned me for accepting him." "Yet you chose him," Takoda said, his tone making it a question. Sarah's hands stilled on her, sewing. "I did," she said softly. He spoke of adventure, of wide-open spaces, of building something of our own. After years of my father's strict rules, of being told exactly what my life would be. She trailed off, then continued more firmly. "Yes, I chose him, and I don't regret it, despite everything. He gave me Emma." Takoda nodded as if this made perfect sense to him. "Children are the gift that remains when all else is taken," he said, his gaze moving to Emma, who was now fully absorbed in her leatherwork. "They carry our spirit forward when our own bodies return to Earth." The conversation lapsed into comfortable silence, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the persistent howl of the wind outside. Sarah returned to her sewing, but her mind remained on Takoda's words. Children as gifts, as carriers of spirit. It was a beautiful way to think of Emma, not as a burden to be protected, a responsibility to be shouldered, but as the living embodiment of love that transcended even death. The storm finally broke on the third day, leaving behind a transformed landscape. When they cautiously opened the cabin door, they found the valley blanketed in pristine white, the familiar landmarks altered into fantastic new shapes. The morning sun turned the snow into a field of diamonds, so bright it hurt the eyes to look directly at it. Emma gasped in delight. "It's beautiful!" she exclaimed, taking a tentative step onto the crunching surface. Takoda followed her out, testing the snow's depth with a measuring stick. "Good powder," he declared. "Not too wet, not too dry." He glanced back at Sarah, who stood in the doorway, drinking in the crystalline air. "Good for first snowfall. More will come." Sarah nodded, understanding the unspoken message. This was merely the beginning of winter's grip on the valley. There would be harder storms ahead, longer confinements, greater challenges to their resources and spirits. Yet standing there in the brilliant morning light, watching Emma's delighted exploration of this new white world, Sarah felt a curious sense of readiness. They had prepared what could be prepared. The rest was in the hands of greater powers, and somehow, in this moment, that felt like enough. Winter settled into the valley like a patient predator, its grip tightening gradually, but inexorably. The first storm had merely been a warning shot, a glimpse of what was to come. Now, as December deepened, the snow accumulated in earnest, drifting against the cabin walls, transforming familiar landmarks into strange new shapes. Sarah stood at the cabin door one morning, watching as Takoda cleared a path to the woodpile. His breath clouded in the frigid air, his movements efficient and purposeful as always. Emma sat nearby on a stump he had cleared of snow, bundled in layers of clothing, topped by a rabbit fur cape Takoda had fashioned for her, her small fingers working a piece of sinew with growing skill. The scene struck Sarah with an unexpected wave of emotion. A month ago, they had been desperate outcasts, driven from safety into a world that seemed bent on their destruction. Now here they were, sheltered, warm, with food stored for the winter and a protector who taught them daily how to survive in this harsh land. The transformation was almost miraculous. "Mama, look!" Emma called, holding up her handiwork. "I made a pouch all by myself." Sarah moved to examine her daughter's creation. The small deerskin pouch was crude by adult standards, the stitches uneven, but it was undeniably functional. A remarkable achievement for an 8-year-old who had never attempted leatherwork before Takoda's patient instruction. "It's wonderful, sweetheart," Sarah said, genuinely impressed. "What will you keep in it?" Emma considered the question seriously. "Special things," she decided. "My treasures." She patted the pocket where she still carried her wooden horse. "But not Papa's horse. That stays with me always." Sarah smiled, touching her daughter's hair gently. Emma spoke of Thomas less frequently now, but when she did, it was with a simple directness that suggested healing rather than forgetting. The wooden horse had become not a reminder of loss, but a connection to memory, a bridge between past and present. Takoda approached, his task completed. "Storm comes," he announced, glancing at the western sky where dark clouds were gathering. "Small one, I think. Good day to stay inside, to work with hands." They retreated to the cabin's warmth, each settling into now familiar routines. Takoda worked on a new pair of moccasins, the promised footwear for Sarah taking shape beneath. His skilled fingers, Emma sorted through her collection of treasures, the pine cone, the eagle feather, various interesting stones and bones, arranging them carefully before deciding which would go into her new pouch. Sarah stirred a pot of stew hanging over the fire, adding dried herbs that filled the cabin with a savory aroma. The domesticity of the scene would have been unremarkable in most households, but Sarah couldn't help marveling at how extraordinary it truly was. A white woman and child sharing peaceful quarters with a Comanche warrior. Their days marked not by fear or suspicion, but by growing trust and mutual reliance. "Emma," Takoda said without looking up from his work, "bring the moccasin you started yesterday. Time to continue learning." Emma hurried to retrieve her own project, a miniature version of the footwear Takoda crafted, sized for her wooden horse. She settled beside him on the floor, watching intently as he demonstrated the next step in the process. "Like this," he said, showing her how to punch holes along the edge of the soft leather. "Careful. Steady hands make good work." Sarah watched them from her place by the fire, struck by the tableau they presented. The formidable warrior with his dark braids and weather-lined face bent in patient instruction over the small blonde child whose face reflected absolute concentration. What would the people of Copper Creek think if they could see this scene? Would they recognize the humanity in it, or would they see only their own fears reflected back at them? The thought of Copper Creek brought a familiar twist of anger in Sarah's chest, though its edge had dulled somewhat with time and distance. Mayor Blackwood and his cronies seemed increasingly remote, figures from another life rather than immediate threats. Yet Sarah knew better than to believe they were truly safe from the town's reach. Spring would come eventually, the passes would clear, and hunters or trappers might venture into these remote hills. If word reached Copper Creek of their whereabouts, of their unorthodox arrangement. "Your thoughts are loud," Dakota observed, interrupting her brooding, "like thunder before rain." Sarah met his gaze, surprised as always by his perception. "Just remembering," she said vaguely. Dakota held her eyes for a moment longer, then nodded slightly, returning to his work. But later, after Emma had fallen asleep on her pallet near the fire, exhausted from her day's activities, he brought up the subject again. "The town still holds power over you," he said, his voice low so as not to disturb the child. "Even here, where they cannot reach." Sarah sighed, turning the healing stone over in her palm. A habit she had developed when troubled. "Not the town itself," she admitted, "but the danger it represents. If they knew we were here, with you." Dakota considered this. "You fear they would come for you? For the child?" "Perhaps," Sarah said. "Or for you. They might see your help as—" She hesitated, searching for words that wouldn't cause offense. "As corruption," Dakota finished for her. "White woman, white child living with savage Comanche." His tone was matter-of-fact, without bitterness, though the words themselves carried centuries of pain. Sarah nodded, unable to deny the truth of his assessment. "There are good people there," she said after a moment. "People who might have helped us if they hadn't been afraid of Blackwood, of what he might do to them if they defied him. But even they would likely see this arrangement as unnatural." "And you?" Dakota asked, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "What do you see when you look at this arrangement, as you call it?" The question caught Sarah off guard. What did she see? A month ago, she might have echoed the town's presumed judgment, a situation born of desperation, acceptable only as a temporary measure until a more suitable arrangement could be found. But now, "I see safety," she said slowly, feeling her way toward a truth she hadn't fully articulated even to herself. "I see Emma, learning and growing stronger every day. I see a man who has shown us more kindness than those who called themselves Christians, who has asked for nothing in return." Dakota remained silent, waiting. "I see a home," Sarah finished softly, the admission both frightening and liberating. "Not permanent, perhaps, but more of a home than we've had since Thomas died." Dakota nodded, satisfaction evident in his posture. "The valley welcomes those who see it truly," he said, "who respect its ways, its rhythms." He glanced at Emma's sleeping form. The child understood this from the beginning. Adults take longer, too many ideas in the way. Sarah smiled faintly. Emma has always seen things clearly, sometimes too clearly for her own good. "No such thing as seeing too clearly," Dakota countered. "Only seeing what is comfortable instead of what is true." The conversation shifted to more practical matters then. Plans for the coming days, adjustments needed for the deepening winter, tasks to be completed before the next storm. But Dakota's question lingered in Sarah's mind late into the night. What did she truly see when she looked at their situation? And more unsettlingly, what did she feel? The winter days fell into a rhythm of their own, distinct from the patterns of town life or even the more recent chaos of their flight from Copper Creek. Each morning began before dawn, with Dakota rising, first to rebuild the fire and check the perimeter of their small compound. Sarah would wake next, preparing a simple breakfast while Emma slept on, growing children needing the extra rest that adults often denied themselves. Their days were filled with practical tasks, maintaining the cabin, preparing food, crafting necessary items, caring for the horse in its shelter beside the cabin. But there were moments of unexpected joy as well. Emma fashioning a snow angel in a fresh drift, her laughter echoing across the valley. Dakota teaching them both to identify animal tracks in the snow, the stories written there for those who knew how to read them. Sarah discovering a nest of winter songbirds in the eaves of the cabin, their tiny bodies huddled together against the cold. In the evenings, they gathered by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes sitting in comfortable silence. Dakota occasionally told stories, Comanche legends about the creation of the world, about the stars and their meanings, about the animals and their special powers. Emma absorbed these tales with wide-eyed wonder, her imagination fired by visions of a world where spirits moved through all living things, where lessons could be learned from the flight of an eagle or the patience of a hunting fox. Sarah found herself drawn to these stories as well, though part of her still resisted their pagan implications. There was poetry in them, wisdom certainly, but they stood at odds with the stern Protestant teachings of her youth. Yet who had shown more Christian charity, the church-going citizens of Copper Creek who had cast them out to die, or this Comanche warrior who had taken them in and asked nothing in return? The question troubled her, challenging foundations she had long taken for granted. She found herself watching Dakota more closely, studying his interactions with Emma, his care for their small household, his quiet strength that never became domination. He was unlike any man she had known before, neither the controlling patriarchs of her Eastern upbringing, nor Thomas with his grand dreams and fragile promises. One evening, as a particularly fierce storm raged outside, Emma requested a story about thunder, curious about the distant rumbling that occasionally punctuated the howling wind. "My people say thunder is the sound of great eagles beating their wings against the sky," Dakota began, his deep voice carrying easily over the storm's noise. "These thunderbirds bring rain to nourish the earth, lightning to cleanse it of evil. Spirits." Emma leaned forward enraptured. "Are they good or bad, the thunderbirds?" "Neither," Dakota replied. "They simply are. Like all powerful things, they can bring life or death, depending on how humans receive their gifts. Rain in proper amounts makes crops grow. Too much brings floods. Lightning clears dead wood from forests, but can also burn homes. Like people," Emma said unexpectedly, "they can be good or bad depending on how they act." Dakota nodded, pleased by her insight. "Exactly so. Even those who seem most dangerous may show kindness. Even those who seem most kind may harbor darkness." Sarah felt his gaze touch her briefly, and she wondered if he was thinking, as she was, of Copper Creek, of Mayor Blackwood's pleasant smile as he proclaimed her cursed, of the way the townspeople had nodded along, fear overriding whatever kindness they might have otherwise shown. "Did your wife tell stories too?" Emma asked suddenly, the innocent question landing like a stone in still water. Sarah inhaled sharply, about to intervene. They had tacitly avoided mentioning Dakota's lost family since his initial revelation, but Dakota answered before she could speak. "Yes," he said simply. "A pony knew many stories, some passed down from her grandmother, some from dreams, some from watching the world with clear eyes." A faint smile touched his lips. "She told them differently than I do. More laughter in her tales, more trickster spirits causing trouble before wisdom came." Emma considered this. "I wish I could have heard her stories," she said wistfully. "Perhaps you do," Dakota replied. "Some say stories never truly die. They float on the wind, looking for new voices to speak them, new ears to hear them." He glanced at the cabin wall, where the storm's fury seemed to be intensifying. "Listen closely to the wind sometimes. You might hear stories not meant for human tongues to tell." Emma's eyes widened at this mystical suggestion. Even Sarah found herself affected by it, imagining ancient tales carried on the winter winds, seeking receptive hearts. It was a beautiful thought, regardless of its literal truth. Later, after Emma had fallen asleep, Takoda spoke again of a pony, surprising Sarah with his openness. "She would have liked you," he said quietly. "Strong woman, clear-eyed, like your daughter." Sarah felt a curious warmth at this assessment. "What was she like?" she asked, realizing she knew almost nothing about the woman whose memory Takoda carried so carefully. "Fierce," Takoda said after a moment's consideration. "Not in loud ways, quiet fierceness. Would stand against entire council if she believed they were wrong." His eyes grew distant with memory. "Healer, like you, knew plants, their powers, could set broken bones, ease birthing pains." "How did you meet her?" Sarah asked, drawn into this glimpse of Takoda's past life. A faint smile touched his lips. "She shot me," he said simply. Sarah blinked in surprise. "She what?" "With arrow," Takoda clarified, the smile growing slightly. "I was young warrior then, foolish, showing off. Rode too close to her family's camp. She thought I meant harm." He touched his shoulder briefly. "Good shot. Clean wound. Then she came to my camp next day, brought medicine plants. Said if I lived, it proved I was meant for something useful." Sarah found herself smiling at the story. "And you married her after that?" "Not right away," Takoda replied. "Took time. Proved myself worthy of fierce woman with good aim." His expression grew more serious. 5 winters together, then fever came." He fell silent, the old grief evident in the set of his shoulders. "I'm sorry," Sarah said softly, understanding all too well the hollow space left by such a loss. Takoda nodded in acknowledgement. "Your husband," he said after a moment, "he was good man?" Sarah considered the question, appreciating that Takoda asked rather than assumed. "Yes," she said finally. "Not perfect. He dreamed too big sometimes, took risks he shouldn't have, but his heart was good. He loved Emma desperately, would have done anything for her." "And for you?" Takoda asked, his perception uncomfortably. "Acute." Sarah hesitated. "He loved me," she said, though the certainty she once felt had been eroded by time and hardship. But perhaps he loved his dreams more, the idea of success, of proving himself to the world. Takoda seemed to understand the complexity behind her words. "Men often mistake wanting for loving," he observed. "Think providing things is same as providing presents." The insight struck Sarah with unexpected force. Yes, that had been Thomas's way, always focused on the next opportunity, the next venture that would give them a better life. Even when physically present, his mind had often been elsewhere, calculating, planning, dreaming. She had admired his ambition, his refusal to settle for less than he believed they deserved. But that same quality had kept him from fully inhabiting the life they actually had. "Takoda," she began, then paused, uncertain how to frame her question. "Do you ever regret it? Coming to our aid that night, taking us in?" Takoda looked at her steadily. "No," he said, the single syllable carrying absolute conviction. "But it must be a burden," Sarah persisted. "Extra mouths to feed, extra work, and the risk if anyone from town should discover us here." "Not burden," Takoda corrected her. "Choice, different thing." He gestured toward Emma's sleeping form. "Child deserves chance to grow strong, to find her path. You deserve peace, to heal wounds inside." He touched the center of his chest briefly. Wounds not seen by eyes. Sarah felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "You've given us so much," she said softly. "I don't know how we can ever repay you." Takoda shook his head slightly. "Not trade," he said. "Not debt to be repaid, simply right action when paths cross." He rose then, moving to check that the cabin door was securely barred against the storm. The conversation was clearly finished, at least for tonight. But Sarah remained by the fire long after Takoda had retired to his pallet in the lean-to, turning his words over in her mind like precious stones, examining them from all angles. Not burden, choice. The distinction mattered, she realized. It spoke to a kind of freedom she had rarely experienced, the freedom to act from conviction, rather than obligation, from authentic choice rather than social expectation. Had she ever made such a choice? Her marriage to Thomas had been an escape as much as a love match, a flight from her father's strictures into what had seemed like freedom. Her care for Emma was born of bone-deep love, but also inescapable duty. Even her departure from Copper Creek had been forced upon her rather than freely chosen. What would it mean to live as Takoda did, making clear-eyed choices based on inner conviction rather than external pressure? The question followed Sarah into sleep, weaving through her dreams like smoke from a distant fire. The days grew shorter, the nights longer, winter's grip tightening around their valley sanctuary. Yet inside the cabin, a different kind of warmth flourished. Emma blossomed under Takoda's patient tutelage, absorbing knowledge like the dry earth. Drinks rain, eager, insatiable. She learned to identify animal tracks in the snow, to predict weather changes from cloud patterns, to craft simple but useful items from materials at hand. More surprising to Sarah was her own transformation. The constant fear that had been her companion since Thomas's death gradually receded, replaced by a growing confidence in her ability to face whatever challenges arose. Under Takoda's guidance, she refined her knowledge of medicinal plants, learning which ones could be harvested even in winter and how to prepare them properly. Her hands, once soft from town life, grew stronger and more capable, equally adept at skinning a rabbit or stitching a torn garment. And beneath these practical changes, something else shifted. A healing so gradual, Sarah hardly noticed it happening until it was well underway. The anger she had carried, the bitterness toward Copper Creek, toward Thomas for leaving them vulnerable, toward a God who had seemed to abandon them. It didn't disappear entirely, but it softened, became less consuming. "You stand differently now," Takoda observed one morning as they worked together to mend a snowshoe. "Shoulders back, eyes clear." Sarah glanced up, surprised by the comment. "Do I?" Takoda nodded. "When you first came to Valley, you carried invisible weight, pressed down here." He touched his own shoulders, demonstrating. "Now you stand taller. Weight's still there, perhaps, but you carry it differently." Sarah considered this assessment. It was true that she felt somehow lighter, more present in her own body. The constant vigilance, the bracing for the next disaster, those habits had begun to loosen their hold on her. "The valley is good medicine," Takoda continued. "Teaches patience, shows how small human troubles are against mountains, against seasons. And yet human troubles matter too," Sarah countered gently. "Emma's happiness, her safety, those aren't small things." "No," Takoda agreed, "not small, but different scale." He gestured toward the cabin window, where the snow-covered mountains were visible in the distance. "Mountains remember time when humans did not walk here. We'll remember time when we are gone. This perspective heals." Sarah wasn't entirely convinced by this philosophy, with its hint of fatalism, its diminishment of individual human concerns. And yet she couldn't deny the peace she had found in this place, in the daily rhythm of survival that left little room for useless regrets or anxieties about matters beyond her control. Christmas approached, though Sarah had deliberately avoided marking its coming. Without a calendar or regular contact with the outside world, it would have been easy to let the holiday pass unremarked. But Emma had been counting days in her own way, making small notches on a stick hidden beneath her sleeping furs. "3 more days until Christmas, Mama," she announced one morning, her voice pitched low, so Takoda, outside checking the horse, wouldn't hear. Sarah sighed. "Emma, sweetheart, we can't really celebrate Christmas here. We have no gifts, no special food set aside. It might be better just to let it pass." Emma's face fell. "But it's Christmas," she said, as if this fact alone should overcome all practical obstacles, and Dakota might never have had a Christmas before. Sarah doubted that Dakota had any interest in celebrating Christian holidays, but she recognized the need in Emma's eyes, the need for continuity, for connection to the life they had left behind. "Perhaps a small observance," she conceded. "We could sing some carols, tell the Christmas story." Emma brightened immediately. "And make gifts, not bought ones, but things we make ourselves, like Dakota taught us." Sarah hesitated, uncertain how their Comanche host would receive such an overture. But Emma's enthusiasm was irresistible, and perhaps it would do them all good to mark the season in some small way. "All right," she agreed, "but simple gifts, only from materials we already have. And we should ask Dakota if he minds us celebrating in his home." To Sarah's surprise, Dakota received the idea with thoughtful interest rather than resistance. "Many peoples mark midwinter with celebration," he observed. "Time when sun begins return journey, when days start growing longer again. Good time for hope." Encouraged by his response, Emma threw herself into secret preparations, working on her gift for Dakota whenever he was outside the cabin. Sarah also found moments to craft small tokens, a finely sewn tobacco pouch for Dakota, a doll made from corn husks, and scraps of fabric for Emma. Dakota himself seemed to enter into the spirit of the occasion, disappearing for several hours 2 days before Christmas, despite the bitter cold. He returned with a bundle of fragrant pine boughs, which he arranged around the cabin. "For good smell," he explained, when Emma exclaimed over them. "Pine keeps away winter sickness." On Christmas Eve, Sarah told the nativity story by firelight, Emma listening with rapt attention, despite having heard it countless times before. Dakota listened as well, his face thoughtful as Sarah recounted the tale of a child born in humble circumstances, destined to change the world. "You're Jesus' child," he said when she had finished. "Born in place for animals, yes? No proper shelter." Sarah nodded. "In a stable because there was no room at the inn." Dakota considered this. "My people would understand this. Important things often begin in unexpected places with no grand announcement." The observation touched Sarah deeply. Perhaps there was more common ground between their beliefs than she had imagined, more universal truth that transcended the specific forms different cultures gave it. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold, sunlight glittering on the snow-covered landscape. Emma woke early, barely containing her excitement, as Sarah prepared a special breakfast: cornmeal cakes sweetened with the precious remaining honey, strips of venison cooked with wild saga. After they had eaten, Emma could wait no longer. "Can we give our gifts now?" she asked, practically bouncing with anticipation. Sarah smiled. "Yes, it's time." Emma raced to retrieve her carefully hidden creations. For Sarah, she had made a bracelet of braided sinew decorated with tiny carved wooden beads. For Dakota, she had crafted a small but remarkably detailed figure of his paint horse, whittled from soft pine wood with tools he had lent her. "Emma," Sarah breathed, genuinely impressed by the bracelet's workmanship, "this is beautiful. When did you learn to carve beads?" "Dakota showed me," Emma said proudly, "but he didn't know what I was making them for." Dakota examined his gift with equal appreciation, turning the small horse carving to admire it from all angles. "Very good work," he said seriously. "You watched well, remembered details." His genuine approval made Emma glow with pride. Sarah presented her gifts next, the tobacco pouch for Dakota and the corn husk doll for Emma. Her daughter immediately hugged the doll close, declaring it the most beautiful one she'd ever seen. Dakota ran his fingers over the pouch's neat stitching, nodding in approval. Fine work, he said. Useful gift. Thank you. Then, to Sarah's surprise, Takoda produced gifts of his own. For Emma, he had carved a small flute from river cane, decorated with burned designs of birds in flight. For making music, he explained, as Emma examined it with wonder. Birds sing to greet returning sun. Now you can join them. For Sarah, he had crafted something entirely unexpected. A small book, its covers made from thin pieces of smoothed wood, its pages formed from scraped deerskin stitched together along one edge. The pages were blank, waiting to be filled. For plant knowledge, Takoda said as Sarah ran her fingers over the smooth wooden cover. You spoke of grandmother's herb book. Now you can make your own. For Emma later, for others who need healing. Sarah stared at the gift, deeply moved by the thought behind it. Takoda had listened when she spoke of her grandmother's herbal, had understood what its loss had meant to her, and more than that, he had recognized her knowledge as something valuable, something worth preserving and passing on. Thank you, she said softly, meeting his eyes. I don't have words for what this means to me. Takoda nodded, seeming to understand everything she couldn't articulate. The moment stretched between them, a silent communication more profound than words could express. Emma broke the spell by attempting to play her new flute, producing a breathy, wavering note that made them all laugh. The day continued in a spirit of simple celebration. Stories shared, a special meal of roasted grouse Takoda had snared the day before, Emma's increasingly successful attempts at flute playing. That night, as Emma slept exhausted from the day's excitement, Sarah sat with Takoda by the fire. The cabin was peaceful, still adorned with pine boughs whose fragrance filled the air. Thank you, Sarah said again, for allowing us to celebrate, for participating in our tradition. Takoda nodded. Good to honor what brings joy, he said simply. Too little joy in world to refuse it when it comes? Sarah smiled, running her fingers over the smooth cover of her new book. I've been thinking about what you said before, about choice versus burden. Takoda waited, giving her space to continue. I've spent so much time feeling that everything was happening to me, Sarah said slowly. Thomas's death, the town turning against us, even finding ourselves here. But I'm beginning to understand that even in the most difficult circumstances, there are still choices to be made. How to respond, how to move forward. Yes, Takoda agreed. Always choice in how we carry what life gives. Cannot choose storm, but can choose how to face it. Sarah nodded, feeling the truth of his words resonate within her. When spring comes, she said carefully, Emma and I will have choices to make about where to go, what to do next. Takoda was silent for a long moment, the firelight playing across his features. Finally he spoke, his voice low but clear. When spring comes, you will have choice. But remember this, Valley does not belong to me alone, has room for those who respect its ways, who bring good spirits to its soil. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Was he suggesting what she thought he was, that they could stay beyond winter, make a more permanent home here? But the town, she began uncertainly. If they ever learned we were living here with you. Town is far, Takoda said. Few come to these hills. Those who do can be avoided. He paused, then added, or faced if necessary. The quiet confidence in his voice steadied something inside Sarah. Yes, there would always be risks. Life on the frontier was inherently precarious, filled with dangers both natural and human. But perhaps the greatest risk was refusing connection, refusing community out of fear of what might happen. I can't make that decision tonight, Sarah said honestly, but I promise to consider it, to truly consider it. Takoda nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer. Proper decisions need Proper time, he agreed. Like good stew needs slow cooking. Sarah smiled at the homely comparison. Yes, exactly like that. They sat in companionable silence for a time, watching the fires dance. Outside, the winter wind sang around the cabin's sturdy walls, but inside was warmth, safety, the beginnings of something that might, with care and patience, grow into a shared future. Emma's flute lay on the table where she had carefully placed it before sleep. Tomorrow, Dakota would begin teaching her simple songs, bird calls and wind voices translated into music. Sarah's blank book waited beside it, ready to receive the knowledge she had carried inside her, the healing wisdom passed down through generations of women. And between Dakota and Sarah, something new and fragile was taking form, not quite spoken, not yet fully understood, but real nonetheless. A connection born of necessity but evolving into choice, a recognition of something shared despite all the differences of culture and background that might have separated them. As the fire burned low, Sarah found herself thinking of those first, desperate days after being cast out from Copper Creek. The cold that had seemed to penetrate to her very bones, the fear that had threatened to consume her, the certainty that she and Emma faced death alone in the wilderness. Instead, they had found Dakota, or perhaps he had found them. Either way, their paths had crossed in that moment of greatest need, changing all their lives in ways none of them could have foreseen. The town that had rejected them had inadvertently set them on a path towards something deeper than mere acceptance, toward a true belonging based not on conformity or convention, but on mutual respect and shared humanity. Spring would come eventually, bringing with it choices and challenges. The future remained unwritten, uncertain, but for now, in this moment, Sarah felt something she had not experienced in far too long, a sense of rightness, of being exactly where she was meant to be. Outside, the stars wheeled slowly across the winter sky, indifferent to human concerns, yet somehow comforting in their constancy. Inside the cabin, the fire's embers glowed warm and steady, a small heart of light in the vast darkness, a promise, kept against the cold. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.